Hello world, Nerd Shaman here with another character highlight. And today we're going to be talking about Elena Oswald, who is a rushdown character and very fun to play. I also wanted to start from the character select screen to give you guys an example of what it's like to actually choose your character in this game. So you'll pick your character, and the game will present you with that character's hand-to-hand style, their weapon style, and their character power, and then each fighting style has a light stance and a heavy stance, which will give you a brief preview on the right of what that attack sequence will actually look like. So I'm going to go ahead and map my projectile stance to 3, and you can see in the spider chart that pops up on the left that this move has excellent range, is pretty efficient for what it does, and is relatively strong, but not especially fast for a projectile. Next, I'm going to choose a weapon stance, and in almost every build I try to take at least one weapon stance, since without one, you lose a couple of options. You're not able to do weapon clashes, which is what happens when a weapon hits an opponent's weapon without either player actually connecting with the hitbox. And you're also not able to hit enemy projectiles away. And so you give up defensive options without having one. That said, there are times when having the 2 character power stances and 2 hand-to-hand stances have advantages that work really well in a matchup. In this case, though, I am going to take TendrilArmorHeavy as a weapon stance, and then I'm also going to actually take both her light and heavy hand-to-hand stance, her break skate attacks. And that's because of the way that the special attacks there synergize with the other stances I've selected. And then for the training dummy, we're just going to go ahead and use Ariel Kayonamura, who's the character we went over in our first character highlight. And then let's just jump right into it. So, first I'm going to go over her standing attacks. So let's start with BrakeSkateLight, which looks like this on hit. BrakeSkateLight's an excellent stance because of its distance. It goes really, really far. Just doing the stand 1 goes pretty far, and then the string itself actually goes halfway across this map, and this is the biggest map in the game. In addition to that, the knock-up from the 4th hit is a true knock-up, so the opponent isn't able to recover prior to landing on the ground during that entire time that they're falling, which is different than, for example, the BrakeSkateHeavy stance, which has more power and knocks the opponent further into the corner, but isn't a true knock-up. So if your opponent was just holding L1 to recover, they would recover before they hit the ground, unlike BrakeSkateLight, where they're in the air for a while. Additionally, since BrakeSkateLight has 4 hits, you're able to do much more intricate combos and longer lasting combos without triggering an infinity attack. So next, let's go over her ShadowGhostLight stance, which looks like this on hit. It goes really, really far, and it is a very good projectile, but not for zoning. It's a bit slow on recovery, especially considering how fast other projectiles in the game can be, and it doesn't hit the opponent with very much force, so the amount of time that their hit stun is brief. If they actually time it correctly, they're able to get out in between the first and second hit of that combo. That said, they are really good at blocking out your opponent's projectile, so if you're fighting a zoning character, because they are really big hitboxes, it's easy to stop that zoning pressure and then get it. Last for her standing attacks is her TendrilArmorHeavy stance, which is actually only 1 hit, but that's because it's that hit, which is amazing. By itself, it does almost 10 damage with the default damage settings. And in addition to that, it re-stands the opponent at most early places in a combo. So when you hit your opponent in the air, the speed at which they fall increases. So the more hits you get into a combo, the faster your opponent is going to be falling. but the fall speed is decreased a little bit if you can do a standing reset, which happens anytime you hit your opponent while their hurt box is collided with the ground. And so because this attack pulls the opponent to the ground, you can get several standing resets early in the combo while the fall speed is still relatively low. Next, let's go over the low attacks and the jump attacks. So most stances have one set of low attack between both stances of a style. So the BrakeSkateLight style or stance and the BrakeSkateHeavy stance both have the same low attacks. Low attacks and standing attacks will trigger infinites the same way. So if you do a sequence of low attacks and then do standing attacks that are the same positions in that string, it will trigger an infinite. That said, doing the low attacks of the heavy and then the light attacks of the stand, or the stand attacks of the light, won't trigger an infinite. Instead, it'll allow you to continue the combo since those are different attacks while they're standing. The jump attacks for most stances is also the same when they're from the same style. In this case, they're relatively similar, but the hits are different. So they're both dive kicks. The BrakeSkateHeavy dive kick looks like this. It just goes in on the opponent. It's got decent distance for a dive kick. It is the most shallow dive kick in the game, but it's still pretty good because it's a dive kick. And then her heavy is also a dive kick, but it's even more shallow, but that's because it hits twice and ground bounces the opponent. In addition to that, it's also a pressure attack. So if your opponent does a wake-up attack, it will beat the armor from the wake-up attack, and both hits will go through. Besides being a regular ground bounce, it's also a shallow ground bounce, which means that you can use it to bounce your opponent to the ground and force a standing reset, or force Oki, since the fall speed increases more quickly the more times you ground bounce your opponent. The low string for Shadow Ghost looks like this, and it's an even slower projectile, but it gives a really good space control across the ground, especially for an opponent who also has low projectiles. And it also changes the way that the second hit of the standing string comes out, or rather hits the opponent. So normally this happens your opponent is hit and then knocked up, but with the low stance, because both hitboxes hit at about the same time, your opponent is knocked a little bit further and with a bit more force because of the way that force acts. The jumping attack for Shadow Ghost looks like this. It is a ground bouncing attack, but it doesn't pull Elena down, so it's not very good for comboing. It's mostly good for keeping space control. Additionally, because of the way that jump attacks work, it's not very good for initiating a combo. When you hit your opponent, you can attack multiple times in the air as long as your opponent is also in the air when you hit them. Otherwise, you can only hit your opponent once, and so if you initiate damage with it, you're not in a very good position to keep attacking. That said, unlike every other character in the game, Elena has an attack that hits once on the ground and then pulls the opponent up, so she can actually start combos with her TendrilArmorHeavy attack because it pulls the opponent into the air and the second hit occurs while they're in the air, giving her the ability to continue her combo and get big damage off of air attacks. And so on. And then her low attack for her Tendril Armor stance, it looks like this on hit. It's kind of slow for a low attack, but in the heavy stance it actually is a crush attack. And so if you know your opponent is playing defensively, always waking up and pressing repulse burst, you can do a crush attack and then they'll get crushed rather than earning meter, and it'll be your turn for a full combo punish. Next, let's go over how these attacks work with her specials. So her special for her BrakeSkateLight and BrakeSkateHeavy stance is relatively similar. Looks like this. It's a relatively brief animation, and what it does is it gives her a small buff. So normally when you attack your opponent with ShadowGhostHeavy, it knocks them a bit too far to really combo. However, with the BrakeSkateLight special, you have increased movement speed. So Elena is the second fastest accelerating and tied with the fastest character in the game for speed. But with her BrakeSkateHeavy, she is the fastest accelerating and fastest character in the game with her run speed. So as long as she has this buff on, you can't outrun her. She's gonna catch you. She's the fastest character by more than a little bit. Additionally, it opens up combo potential. So before we couldn't combo, but now that we have increased movement speed, we can combo pretty easily there. Next, let's look at the BrakeSkateHeavy, which does the same thing, but instead of movement speed, it's for her attack speed. So normally, with her ShadowGhostLight attack, there isn't much you can do from full distance. But combining her ShadowGhostLight and her BrakeSkateHeavy specials, we're able to get combos out of this. So we can turn on the increased movement speed, and then use the special, which is this teleport. So normally, when you do that teleport, you're not really able to use most of her attacks after. Now you can do another ShadowGhostLight and ShadowGhostHeavy after, but since you've done the same attack sequence twice as your first 4 hits of the combo, you're pretty much guaranteed to trigger an infinite pretty early in the combo, and so it's not very good for getting big damage, and it's a very basic conversion. Those 4 hits don't even stack up to 10 damage. It's less damage than you get for just doing TendrilArmorHeavy. That said, for the distance that it goes, there are reasons to do that. However, if you have on the attack speed buff, you're now able to do things that you weren't before, and you can fit that attack speed buff in the middle of combos. So you can do an attack sequence, and then fit that in there so that now you're powering up in between your move sets, and so you're not vulnerable while you're turning that on, and then you can stack both of them together. And that's something that I think makes Elena maybe the deepest character in the game in terms of finding out what she's even capable of in the first place, because the way that your attacks work changes a bit with the different buffs. So with the attack speed buff on, her standing reset no longer works the same way. And so while you open up certain combo routes, you close off the routes you have from this standing reset by default. Now there are ways to, as you saw before, get the gravity in such a way that you can get 1 or 2 standing resets with the attack speed on from it, but it's figuring out those specific routes that makes that a viable strategy. Otherwise, you're going to rely on the new routes that you get from the attack speed. And then the last special we need to go over is her TendrilArmorHeavy special, which looks like this on hit. And it's really, really good for a number of reasons. Namely that it's a push throw, which means it can't be dashed through. And since it's a rolling attack like that, it covers a lot of ground for a push throw in a really cool way. Additionally, unlike most special attacks, it can be done in the air. And so you can do it to extend your air combos. Well, there it landed on the ground. You can do it to extend your air combos and get a 5th hit in the air. Normally you can only string up to 4 attacks in the air, but with it you can do a 5th attack by doing your special. And that is basically Elena's kit, and how, unlike Ariel, who has additional moves to make her synergy come together, just actually using her moves will give Elena a lot of synergy, especially because of the way that you can put moves in the middle of combos like that. What makes all of this overbearing for the opponent and really brings her up to the level of the rest of the cast is managing your meter and using her special, or rather her super. So her super, or her augment burst, looks like this, where she inputs a command, and then now she has a shadow that can attack with her. And so her shadow does almost all of her attacks. It does her standing attacks and her low attacks. It does not do her special attacks. So for example, that doesn't create a hitbox, and it does not do her jump attacks. So you can't use it to dive kick on the opponent, for example. But what it does do is give her hitbox special randomized types. So there isn't much RNG in this game, but Elena has this shadow which will always either do a crush attack or a pressure attack. So it randomly fights both wake up attacks as an option and repulse burst, or the defensive block mechanic, as an option. And so since she has a push throw, you can, between the push throw, her standing 1 BrakeSkateHeavy crush attack, and the randomized crush attacks from the shadow clone that she makes as her ultimate move, pretty much control all of your opponent's options and lock them down. And so if you're playing perfectly, what you want to do is always have 50 meter, always have your clone out. Always be getting meter, always have your clone out. And once you've mastered that and you start integrating her other abilities, so if you have on her increased movement speed, her increased attack speed, and you're keeping your clone out, you're now the fastest character in the game with 2 hitboxes all the time, and you have a dive kick and you can teleport. And that brings her truly up to the rest of the cast in terms of being a strong, well-rounded character who can fend off every enemy in the game. And that's pretty much Elena in a nutshell. I hope you guys enjoyed it and continue to be awesome.